Somewhere in a factory on the southern coast of China, a machine is filling a cartridge with liquid that will sell 8,000 kilometers away for more than the price of blood. The liquid costs a few cents. The company selling it will charge $62. And for 20 years, nobody could do anything about it until this city learned the trick. You are standing in an electronics store, fluorescent light overhead. You reach for a small plastic case on the shelf, and it's locked, bolted down, behind glass, like it's jewelry. Inside is a cartridge the size of a matchbook. $62. You think you're paying for ink. You are wrong. The liquid inside costs more per liter than human blood, more than perfume, more than vintage champagne. $6,200 a liter for water, dye, and a few cents of stabilizer. And the reason it costs that much isn't chemistry. It's a lock, a deliberate one. But one Chinese city figured out how to pick it, and in doing so, started quietly dismantling a $14 billion a year empire from the inside. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the trap works, why an American giant loses money on purpose to spring it, and why a factory town most people can't find on a map is winning a war the entire Western printing industry thought it had already won. If you like documentaries that pull the back off the modern world and show you the machinery inside, subscribe and stay with me. This one gets satisfying. Here's what most people get wrong. They assume ink is expensive because it's hard to make. It isn't. The ink is the cheapest thing in the entire system. The plastic cartridge, the housing, the tiny chip inside, $1 to $3, all of it. Everything else you pay is markup. And depending on the model, that markup runs between 2,000 and 6,000%. But the markup isn't the clever part. The clever part is how they make you pay it. Because they can't simply charge $60 for $3 of ink and expect you to keep coming back. You'd refill it yourself. You'd buy a cheaper brand. Millions of people have tried to do exactly that. The problem is, your printer won't let you. This business model has a name: razor and blade. King Gillette figured it out back in 1904. Give away the handle almost for free, then charge a premium for the disposable blades that only fit that handle. Cheap way in, a lifetime of repeat purchases. One of the oldest moves in commerce. HP didn't invent it. HP took it somewhere Gillette could never have dreamed of. Because a razor blade doesn't have a computer chip inside it. A razor blade doesn't connect to the internet. And a razor blade can't receive a software update at 2 in the morning that quietly decides to stop working. And this is where the story stops being about ink at all. Because what HP built on top of that century-old trick is something new. Something that reaches through your wall, into a machine you own, and switches it off from the other side of the planet. What HP built is one of the most quietly aggressive control systems in the history of consumer technology. And for 2 decades, it worked perfectly. Let me walk you through it the way an engineer would. Because once you can see all 4 steps at once, the price stops looking like greed and starts looking like architecture. Step 1. HP builds a genuinely good printer. Solid mechanism, reliable feed, a decent scanner. Then they sell it to you at or below what it actually cost them to make. A printer that costs $60 to build ships to your door for $49. HP loses money on every single unit, on purpose. That isn't a mistake in their pricing, that is the pricing. Step 2. Inside that printer sits a firmware chip whose only job is to talk to the cartridges. And every official HP cartridge carries its own microchip, programmed with an authentication code. You slot one in, the printer interrogates that chip, checks it against HP's database. Match, and it prints. No match, and it refuses to move a millimeter. Step 3. HP sells the ink at that 2,000% markup. And because the printer will only accept cartridges carrying the correct chip, and because HP alone decides what correct means, you have no leverage. None at all. You buy HP ink at whatever number HP decides to print on the shelf that year, and step 4 is the one that crosses a line. HP pushes firmware updates to your printer over your own internet connection, inside your own home. They arrive dressed as security patches, routine, harmless, for your protection. But buried in the code is new logic that changes which cartridges the printer will accept. A third-party cartridge that printed perfectly yesterday is rejected this morning. The update moved the goalposts overnight, silently, while you slept. HP's own chief executive, Enrique Lores, said the quiet part out loud in an interview. HP loses money on every printer it sells. He wasn't embarrassed. He was explaining the strategy to investors. Plainly, the printer isn't the product. The printer is the delivery system. The ink is the product. Over the full life of a home printer, the average person spends $500 to $1,000 on ink and toner, 10 to 20 times what the printer itself cost. The razor costs $1, the blades cost $1,000. And the machine that enforces it all has a name. HP calls it dynamic security. You install a cartridge, the printer reads its chip, and if that chip isn't an authentic HP product, the machine flat out refuses. It throws you an error, cartridge damaged, or cartridge missing, but it isn't damaged, and it isn't missing. It's sitting right there, full of ink, perfectly good, ready to work. The printer has simply been ordered to reject it because HP didn't make it. And here's how it plays out in a real house. You buy a cheaper cartridge. You install it. It works flawlessly for weeks. Then, one ordinary morning, you go to print a boarding pass, and the printer just stops. Nothing physically changed about that cartridge. What changed is that HP reached down your internet connection while you weren't looking and switched off something that had worked perfectly the day before. It didn't ask. It didn't warn you. It arrived like a virus. Try to imagine this in any other industry. Imagine buying a car, and one night the manufacturer reaches in over the internet and disables the engine because you filled the tank at the wrong gas station. There would be hearings. There would be outrage. In the printer world, most people don't even know it's being done to them. In 2019, HP got hit with a class action over dynamic security. They settled for $1.5 million and agreed to stop using it on certain models. Most people assumed that was the end of it. It was not. In late 2022 into 2023, the blocking quietly came back under a different name. Printers that had accepted third-party cartridges for months suddenly stopped all over again. And one of the organizations caught in that wave was a nonprofit that provides disaster relief housing. Their printers, the machines they used to produce critical documents in the middle of emergency operations, refused to work because the toner they relied on got rejected by HP's new firmware. A disaster relief group, mid-crisis, shut down over $15 ink. So in January 2024, 11 plaintiffs filed a fresh class action, $5 million, and a demand for a permanent ban. The lawsuit called the firmware updates malware, code that altered a machine's behavior without the owner's consent. HP had built a lock it believed could never be picked, and that belief is exactly what a city in southern China was about to break. Here is where the story turns. Because everything I've described so far would be permanent, a fixed fact of modern life, if not for a place most people have never heard of. Zhuhai sits on the southern coast of Guangdong province, right across the water from Macau. It is not the city people picture when they picture Chinese manufacturing. Shenzhen gets the headlines, Guangzhou gets the traffic, Zhuhai gets overlooked. But in one specific, narrow industry, Zhuhai is the undisputed capital of the entire planet. It produces over 70% of every compatible ink cartridge made anywhere on Earth. 70%. out of one single city. Here's how that happened. It began in the early 1990s when the first HP and Canon printers arrived in Chinese offices, and a single replacement cartridge cost as much as a week's wages for an average worker. Absurd by local standards. So small workshops in Zhuhai started quietly collecting the empties, refilling them with local ink, and selling them back for a fifth of the price. At first, the quality was genuinely terrible. The ink smeared, the colors came out wrong, the cartridges leaked inside the machine, but they cost a fifth of the real thing. And for a business running on thin margins, a fifth was enough to forgive the mess. Through the late 90s, those workshops evolved fast. Entrepreneurs bought better equipment. Chemical engineers built ink that matched the original's exact thickness, its drying time, its color. Molding shops learned to make housings that clicked into HP and Canon printers perfectly. And then a new generation of chip engineers did the one thing that changed everything. They reverse engineered the authentication chips. That single step is the whole game. The chip is the key to the entire monopoly. Without a chip the printer recognizes, a cartridge is just a plastic box full of colored liquid, worthless, turned away at the door. Zhuhai's engineers cracked the code, literally cracked it. And the moment they could manufacture chips that passed the printer's security check, they could make cartridges that were functionally identical to the originals for a fraction of the cost. What had started as cheap, leaking knockoffs became a serious industrial ecosystem. Chip design, precision molding, ink chemistry, automated refill lines, all of it packed into one city, each part feeding the next. The anchor of that ecosystem is a company called Ninstar. Founded in Zhuhai in the year 2000, it grew into a vertically integrated giant with 23,000 employees. Its G&G brand is now the largest compatible consumables brand on Earth, producing over 3 million cartridges a month. Not a year, a month. Ninstar designs its own authentication chips, mixes its own ink, molds its own plastic, and assembles the finished product in factories that run the length of a city block. And then Ninstar did the thing that nobody in the printer industry saw coming. In 2016, it bought Lexmark International, one of the original American printer manufacturers, a genuine old guard name, for $3.5 billion. Sit with the shape of that for a second. The company that built the cheap copies bought the company that built the originals. That is like a generic drug maker turning around and buying Pfizer. The industry did not know how to process it. And with Lexmark inside the tent, Ninstar now plays both sides of the board at once. It builds original Lexmark printers and cartridges, and the compatible alternatives for HP, Canon, and Epson. The engineering pedigree of an American brand welded to the cost structure of a Chinese factory. For its competitors, that combination is devastating. HP's response has been legal warfare. Patent suits against Ninstar subsidiaries in Munich, in the United States, in any court that will hear them. HP says the chips infringe its intellectual property. Ninstar says you have every right to use a compatible product in a printer you already own. But here's the detail that tells you which side is actually winning. Despite the lawsuits, despite the firmware updates, despite the billions HP has poured into locking everyone in, the compatible market keeps growing, and the math is relentless. A set of 4 original HP cartridges runs about $100. A compatible set from Zhuhai runs $15 to $20. Same colors, same volume, same print quality, and independent testing. The only real difference is the name on the box and the chip inside. And every single time HP changes that chip, Zhuhai changes with it, usually within weeks. You thought the chip was the finish line? It's actually the starting gun.
for a race that never stops. Every time HP ships an update that changes its authentication, Zhuhai's engineers buy the new cartridges that same week, pull the chips, reverse engineer the fresh logic, and design new chips that pass. In the early days, that cycle took months. Now, it can take weeks. And these are not hobbyists in a garage. Ninstar runs its own semiconductor division with fabrication and testing gear that rivals what HP uses internally. So HP makes the lock harder, encryption layers, new handshake protocols, time-based checks between printer and cartridge, and every layer they add, Zhuhai eventually walks straight through. This cycle has run for more than a decade, and with each turn, HP spends more building the lock, while Zhuhai gets faster at picking it. Here's the part that should sit with you. Every dollar HP spends locking out compatible cartridges is a dollar that does not improve the printer, the ink, or the price you pay. It is pure defensive spending, built only to protect a markup that survives on one condition, that you never find out what the product really costs. It is a tax on consumers paid by consumers to stop consumers from saving money. And the scale of what that spending protects is staggering. HP's revenue from printing supplies, overwhelmingly ink and toner, was roughly $14 billion in 2024. That is not their total revenue. That is just the ink. $14 billion from a liquid that costs cents per milliliter, sold in cartridges that cost $1 to build, guarded by microchips and midnight firmware updates. If every customer switched to compatible cartridges tomorrow, that entire division would collapse. HP knows it, and Zhuhai knows it too. Now, to be fair, because this isn't a cartoon, HP builds real printers, the hardware is competently engineered. Razor and blade is legal and decades old, and reverse engineering someone else's chip sits in genuinely contested legal territory. But here is the asymmetry the fairness can't erase. De Beers controlled diamonds, Luxottica controlled glasses, HP controls ink. In every case, the monopoly rested on one thing: customers not knowing the real cost of what they bought. And in every case, a place most people had never heard of learned to make the same thing for a fraction of the price and broke the spell. You cannot outlitigate 3 million cartridges a month. So go back to where we started. You're standing in that aisle, the locked glass case, the $62 cartridge and its bright, confident packaging. But now, you know the ink inside it cost pennies. You know the printer itself was sold to you at a loss, on purpose, precisely so you'd end up standing right here, reaching for this, with no alternative. And now, you also know about Zhuhai, 3 million cartridges a month, the company that bought Lexmark for $3.5 billion, the firmware update that shut down a disaster relief group over $15 ink.
There's a certain justice in it if you sit with it long enough. For 20 years, an empire was built on the assumption that ordinary people would never see the machinery and could never touch it even if they did. And the thing that finally cracked it wasn't a regulator or a lawsuit or a boycott. It was a quiet city on the coast of Guangdong that simply refused to accept the lock as permanent and out-engineered it, chip by chip, year after year, until the empire was spending billions just to slow the bleeding. You can still buy the $62 cartridge. It's right there behind the glass. Or you can order the same ink from a factory in Zhuhai for the price of a coffee. Either way, you are no longer standing in the dark. If this changed how you see the cartridge in your printer, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. Next time, I'm breaking down the eyewear monopoly that made your glasses cost more than your phone. And I want your answer to this. HP admitted it loses money on every printer to lock you into its ink, then disabled cartridges people already owned. A single Chinese city now makes 70% of the world's alternative. So whose side are you on? The company protecting its design or the city breaking the lock? Drop it in the comments.